Okay, so here's a hack if you want to unlock your most effective, productive self. And as an entrepreneur, high performing individual, you're probably listening to this podcast because that's exactly what you want to do. And this took me a really long time to figure out. This is backed by science. I'm going to drop a couple of really cool research ideas. But the big takeaway here is simply the quickest way to change your results is to change your environment. And so a lot of times we struggle with focus or discipline. And it's less about your ability to focus. It's less about your ability to exercise discipline and more about the environment in which you're trying to execute it. And I learned this because, I have severe ADHD, and for a long time that was a real struggle for me because I just bought into the narrative that the problem was with me. It was in my biology, and I was losing all the games in life that society had put in front of me. I was losing in school. I was losing in the corporate workplace. And so by the time I was like in my late 20s, I just kind of, accepted that I was the problem. Well, in hindsight, I look back and I realize you can't change the cards that you're dealt, but you can change the games that you play. And the games that you play, that's the environments that you play within. And so when you look at like the school system sitting inside of a box with just a couple of windows inside of a room with a bunch of different people all sitting facing forward, all this conformity, that's not a place for creativity to emerge. And if you think about like what are the strengths and weaknesses of somebody with ADHD, they're a very creative person. They have a lot of pattern recognition. They're novelty seeking, right? You think about the corporate workplace, like same thing. You're inside of a cubicle. No other humans, don't talk, right? Everybody's nice and quiet. Like those environments were not conducive for the things that I wanted to do. So what I started to realize in my 30s as I was starting to build my first businesses was that I could control the effectiveness of my output of work based off of what the work is that I needed to do and then designing my environment appropriately. So if I wanted to do really creative work, and for the most part, I would say entrepreneurship is a creative endeavor. There are a lot of administrative activities though that need to get done, and you need to be in a fundamentally different environment for those than you do for the creative activities. The creative activities, you want to be in places that spark your imagination, that ignite certain parts of your brain. Specifically, there's a part of your brain called the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC. The ACC is a very, very powerful part of your brain that lights up like a Christmas tree when it's around novelty, when it's around things that are inspirational. And one of the easiest ways to ignite that is being in nature. Being in big vistas, being on the side of a mountain, you probably feel more creatively alive with energy when you're on the side of a mountain looking at a beautiful lake with trees everywhere. You're standing on the ocean side and the beach, right? Like that is way more creatively engaging than sitting inside of a cubicle, right? No great work of creativity was ever created inside of a cubicle. A lot of documents were produced, a lot of emails were sent, but not a lot of world-shaking art and creative activities. And so that's the first one. If you want to be more creative, put yourself into more creative environments that ignite that part of your brain. And so when you want to do creative things, make space for that. And one of the things that Anuj and I like to do when we're doing these podcasts, for example, is that we come to the top floor of the building that I live in. We use the common areas overlooking these big vistas. The city is over here. When we look that way, there's not the ocean. We're in Minnesota. There's no ocean here. There's a river. It's really beautiful. And so any direction that you look, all these big windows, you can have these moments that spark that anterior cingulate cortex. I've never actually articulated this to Anuj, but now he's hearing it for the very first time. So, because he asked the question leading into this, he's like, I feel, he just got back from, I think, San Diego, right? Yeah, he's in San Diego next to the ocean and all that stuff. And he's like, I just felt so much more creatively alive and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, yep. So let's like make the subconscious things that we do conscious in it with intention, right? So that's what I'm doing with this podcast now. It's like actually pointing out some of the reasons why we do things that we do in the way that we do them. The other thing with creativity is that when you're with another person, you tend to be more creative. Like there tends to be a spirit of, and this depends on the person that you're with, obviously. If you're with a negative Nancy, then, all your creativity goes out the window because everything's just being constantly shot down. That's another reason I like to create with Anuj here is like having another person to bounce ideas off of. It's more engaging. So that's the first way. If you want to be more creative, change the environment, get outside, get into some viewpoints that open up and expand your horizons. You could go into coffee shops, right? Where there's a lot of energy, just a lot of other activity going on. However, that is a terrible place for me to get done the administrative things of life that need to get done. So when I need to do, financial spreadsheets, I don't sit on top of the roof because I just start daydreaming, right? I need to go lock myself into my office and I don't come out of there. And if you've ever been in my office, it's very austere. There's not a lot going on in there, and that's by intention. There's not a lot of stuff on the walls. There's nothing on the walls. Everything's on the ground because I don't want to get distracted. When I'm in there working on that computer, that is where I do a particular type of work. When I want to write, this is a great example too. Like when I write every morning, I usually take my computer and I just come upstairs. I get out of that office. I come up here. I go into the other rooftop rooms, and I write in a completely different environment than where I go and do the mundane activities of life. Now, that is the easiest, quickest way to change your outputs and how effective you are, is changing your environments. The other way that I really want you to think about environment design is the people that you surround yourself with. If you're surrounding yourself with negative people, it permeates you, right? That through osmosis, their negativity becomes your negativity. If you're surrounding yourself all the time with positive people who have really big dreams for their lives and dream of possibilities for you, and they're always optimistic and encouraging, is it no wonder then that you're going to be more optimistic, more encouraging? You're going to be able to tackle the big, difficult tasks of life and business more than if you were around the negative Nancy's. So give some really hard thought about where it is that you do your creative work, where you do your administrative, more mundane work, and the people that you surround yourself with. And one last story while we're at it, because I just thought of it. Walt Disney famously had 3 rooms in his office where he would do different things. He'd labeled them. I can't remember what they were. You're going to need to go Google this. But it was like he had his creative room where he would go and create. He had his editing room where he'd go and edit. And then he had his like collaboration room where he'd go and collaborate. And they're all connected by these doors. But he would literally have this ritual of going to one place to do the one thing, another place to do the other thing, and another place to do the other things, right? So think really hard about your environment design, because I think that's something that we just kind of take for granted, and we take what's given to us, and we might design our environment to make it pretty and homely and comfortable, but we're not putting enough thought into like, is this conducive for the type of work in which I'm expected to do here? Maybe it's too homely, too comfortable for some things, and maybe it's not quite enough for these other things. So put some time into that, create a game plan. I'm curious. I'd love to hear, actually, do you already do this? Like a lot of people instinctively do, but they haven't actually articulated it to themselves. They're just like, oh yeah, I do my morning work at the coffee shop. I don't know. I just more energy, more flow. It's like, cool. That's great. And then you come back in the afternoon and you just lock yourself in a room and you take your meetings and you do your emails and stuff like that. You could also do the reverse. You could go out into public for your meetings and whatnot, if that's the thing that gives you energy, but it doesn't work for me. But that's going to do it for me, guys and gals. I hope you got some value out of this. If you did, let me know. If you didn't, keep it to yourself, and I'll see you in the next episode.